must be our goal and our guide. And all that we strive for as a human family, dignity and hope, progress and prosperity, depends on peace. But peace depends on us.
Way back in 1998, the late Secretary General of the United Nations by name Kofi Annan thought of an idea, brought an idea of saying the only way to bring world order where crimes committed that are not punishable in local courts, local countries, regional courts could be taken to an international crimes court. The Rome Statute and Rome Treaty of 1998 July was an offspring of already cooked DSGE intelligence system mechanism to keep Africa under check. Up to date, the French government pays 70% of the salaries of the International Criminal Court, from the porter to the judge to the prosecutor and the rest of the other people. This was a project of Kofi Annan and the Kofi Annan Foundation, followed by George Soros as an accomplice of Kofi Annan, brought in by Luis Moreno Campo and the entire system of the West, some countries in the West, to keep check on African countries that did not agree with the policies of the French and to their policies of Western culture. The International Criminal Court Chief Prosecutor Luis Moreno Campo agreed in all this that yes, he has been picking money, extra monies, and we followed the story together with my group in France, powerful investigators in France who worked together with me. And we found out that, truly speaking, Luis Moreno Campo, Fernandez Gomedi, the former judge, the president of the International Criminal Court, laundered money, some coming from American banks themselves. This evidence was put in the ICC. In the case of Bashir versus the chief prosecutor, I filed an application which I still have and which I'm going to publicize again so that people can know that I was right. I've been vindicated because the American friends now have found that my credibility is real, that I was right when I stood up to say this court is corrupt. This court launders money, $17 million of United States money, laundered through Bahamas, through New York banks, back to Ocampo's personal assistant, by then called Fernandez Gomedi Silvia, who later on rose to the ranks of becoming the president of International Criminal Court. It has taken us time, energy, effort, resources to investigate the corruption scandal that have rocked the International Criminal Court. Why should African countries continue to be in the ICC, yet even the superpowers like America saying no, we have enough courts to try our own people? Viewers, it has taken Americans over 20 years to listen to our voices. When we told Rainberger in Nairobi that this court is a corrupt court.
Today, on the eve of September the 11th, I want to deliver a clear and unambiguous message on behalf of the President of the United States. The United States will use any means necessary to protect our citizens and those of our allies from unjust prosecution by this illegitimate court. We will not cooperate with the ICC. We will provide no assistance to the ICC, and we certainly will not join the ICC. We will let the ICC die on its own. After all, for all intents and purposes, the ICC is already dead to us.
A case of the Kenyan people. These cases in Kenya, the chief prosecutor called Fatou Bensouda put serious statements at the end of the cases, discharge and termination. In legal language, these cases pose a very serious threat in the future. What the people of Kenya can do, and they should do, is today to wrap up the work envelope. Because until this envelope is sealed, thrown in Indian Ocean, the chief prosecutor in the future will come and look for that envelope, use it to incriminate people again. It brings me back to the situation. America is sealing its journey out of the ICC. Why do you wait? Why don't you take this opportunity to seal your journeys out of the ICC? America is quitting, warning that it cannot no longer be a party to such an obnoxious court, a court that has no powers, that talks from this side and vomits from the other side, a court that cuts and pastes evidence, a court that buys witnesses, a court that incites incentives, gives incentives to witnesses of a passport and a relocation, then you tell lies about people. A court that sentences you as per the words there. Why should you leave a country that has a jury that checks on what the judges would do, the excesses of judges, and go to a country, a court that has no jury? Time has come for Africa to think. Do we need this court? Does Africa need this court?
There are a number of countries in Africa that produce oil. Kenya today became one of the member states of oil producing countries in Africa. It exported its first oil, where President Uhuru Kenyatta flagged off the oil that was got from Turkana in one of the northeastern parts of this country. But is oil a curse to Africa? Is oil a curse to the entire places where oil is found? We see in the Middle East, the wars in Iran, in Saudi Arabia, in Yemen, in United Arab Emirates. It has developed the area in Qatar. We all have many cities, skyscrapers coming up because of the proceeds from the oil. But can Africa emulate that example and bring the same oil proceeds to make sure that it makes lives better for the people, the betterment of the people of Africa and their families and their other activities? I want to see that. But I might not be able to explain why Africa always falls a victim. Are there external forces that make the oil in Africa to become sour? Is it the competition of the oil companies, Total and Shell BP and others, that come to Africa to take the share of the oil? Simply because we have no energy, ability to be able to drill the oil ourselves, refine it ourselves. It is shocking, therefore, to go to Nigeria, for example, a country that produces third in the world for oil production, has no petrol at the petrol station. Is this not a curse? If it's not a curse, what do you call it? Thank you.
Peace must be our goal and our guide. And all that we strive for as a human family, dignity and hope, progress and prosperity, depends on peace. But peace depends on us.
A very good morning to you, and thank you so much wherever you're watching us from this morning. It is the 5th of November 2019 on a Tuesday here, a very sunny, lovely morning here in Nairobi. I'm glad that you found time to join us today, and so we're glad and thank you so much. My name is Miriam Mugutu, and this is Good Morning Africa, and the television station is Punchline Africa, all the way from Kenya's capital in Nairobi, in conjunction with your sister station there, South Cameroon Broadcasting Corporation, all the way there from Cameroon. So thank you so much, or from Ambazonia, as I want to be known there, SCBC Television. Thank you so much for working with us this morning. So we have a lot to talk about, and we will look at, the news making headlines across Africa, the fracas that happened yesterday in Uganda, where the official opposition leader there, Kizza Besigye, I saw some photos earlier and some videos on social media on how the Ugandan police have met him with a lot of force and water cannon literally being, sprayed towards him, where he was trying to hold a rally, and he was arrested and later on released. I'll let you know the details when we'll be looking at what's making news across Africa. And also now, we just learned that the United States is willing to mediate between, I think, the tiff between, Ethiopia and Egypt over the dam that Ethiopia wants to build on its side, that Egypt thinks it will affect the flow of the only, fresh water that the country has over a river Nile there. So Al-Sisi, in his own wisdom as the chairperson of African Union, thought the United States will be the right people to mediate over this matter. Like, what exactly is wrong with us Africans? The chairperson of African Union could not consider to find a mediator from across Africa, and he reached out to the United States to be the mediation. And guess who Trump gave this work to act as the mediator? Steven Mnuchin. And if you've been following the politics in America, then you know who this person is. And I don't know if he will be the right person to bring solution and this conflict between Ethiopia and Egypt that has now been dragging for a while. We've talked about it in passing, but perhaps today we will go there into details and see what's really happening there. 7 days to go in regards to South Sudan peace deal there. 12th of November is the date where the unity government is supposed to be implemented and formed, and the country is meant to be moving forward. But as things stand, as we speak right now, it appears that it might not happen. This is according to the different informations that we've been receiving, and as well as from the human rights, watch groups have been giving statements. And of course, that started after the key player there, Mr. Machar, who is in Khartoum, came out and said there are few issues that are quite paramount that have not been ironed out. And so there's a prospect of perhaps no peace deal so far, or not being able to meet the deadline. That will be on the 12th of November. Where does this leave South Sudanese? Where does this leave the country of South Sudan, and which way forward? South Sudan, we will look at that also. We have a lot for you. And in Nigeria, what's happening? Nigeria closed all its land boundaries with the neighboring countries and has not been allowing any free movement or importation of goods into the country, and this has been happening also for a while. And the countries that have been very much affected by this move by the Nigerian government is Niger, Benin, and other countries surrounding Nigeria. And so the government did that for several different reasons. But this goes to beat the whole, because they are part of the ECOWAS, the economic bloc in the West African states there. So did Nigeria go against the rules of this body, and what is really happening, and why is Nigeria closing its borders there? So we will look at that and other news across Africa. But right now, I would like for us to take a look, as we usually do when I am by myself. Dr. Matanga is a bit held up somewhere, but don't worry, you are in very good hands. So first of all, I normally will take us through what is making headlines in the local newspapers here, and I will start with the Star newspaper. Remember, yesterday, Chief Justice of Kenya, Mr. David Maraga, had a press conference yesterday, and it was very, it is the first time that he's come out to address a lot of matters. He is not one of the people to... He's been quite a private person. From what we see, he doesn't tweet much. He doesn't talk much to the press. He's not an out there kind of person. So yesterday, he had to come out and talk about this quagmire and these problems that we've been seeing in the judiciary. And his key problem was, and I think when he was giving that press there, he said, of course, the judiciary right now, they're demanding for more money, and they're saying they cannot carry out their normal functioning as the judiciary of our country because of the lack of funding and some parts of the money that was cut by Parliament. And the entire money that they had requested for them to be allocated, they were not really given. So now it's saying for the lack of these funds, the services in the judiciary are nearly crippled. And so he came out, and also while he was giving that press, let me just, read through while we were talking. And we had also another conversation here yesterday in the late afternoon here with Dr. Matanga. So if you watched, well, I will not get so much into the details of it, but... according to the Star newspaper this morning, it says how Uhuru CSs are plotting to remove Maraga, and the story continues to say that the ministers hatched the plot after the CJ refused to remove some judges who are perceived to be hostile to the state. Okay, so the story is on page 6 and 7 of the Star newspaper. So if you want to know what's happening and this whole story, because I was watching the news later on in the evening, and I heard the CJ Maraga say, you know what, these people, it's like he's had a personal attack over him, not just the judiciary, but him. He felt it is a personal attack on his person as the Chief Justice of this country. And he said, they want me to resign. That's why they're frustrating me, but I will not resign. So that is what I think I heard the CJ David Maraga say there. So this story here on page 6 and 7 of the Star newspaper, I think... for just a balanced, look at things. Maybe I just should take a look at this story now. I didn't buy the Star newspaper. Interesting here. And it's saying two powerful cabinet secretaries have been scheming to remove Chief Justice David Maraga. The two, known to be close to President Uhuru Kenyatta, have held several meetings to discuss Maraga and the judiciary. In an unprecedented media conference, the Chief Justice yesterday poured out in public his frustration, revealing that some CSS and PSS are after him. And an angry Maraga, in a televised address to the nation from the steps of the Supreme Court, alleged a secret plot by the executive to remove him from office before December 31st. So we see there. So if you really want to get the details of it, because of the interest of time, I will not look at it, but you go there and take a look at the story. And also on the front pages here of the Star newspapers, Luya, Kikuyu, and Kalenjin to decide Kenya's political future. Now, President Uhuru Kenyatta and Deputy President William Ruto's strongholds control nearly half of Kenya's 47.6 million population, significantly shaping the battle for numbers in 2022. Now, the 2019 census released yesterday provides the clear picture of all regions' numbers, and that will influence the 2022 showdown. Politicians know where they must hunt for votes. Census figures will also be crucial in demarcating boundaries, another electoral consideration, and in the allocation of resources to the counties as well as national planning. Now, results show that Jubilee political bastions of Mount Kenya, Rift Valley, and Northeastern have a total of about 22.4 million people. So there you go. I'm sure the politicians will take this running, and they know now where to go and look for the votes. Especially for the upcoming election. It's not even upcoming. 2023 is still very far off. But when you look at how things are today here in Kenya, you would think elections will be happening in the next 6 months or so, but we're still very far off from even actually having the presidential elections. But that, I think, has done a huge favor to politicians, and now they will know when they're campaigning and when they're having all those rallies and harambes and whatnot, they probably now will try to reschedule well and know where to go and hunt for votes. But hey, the results of the census that was carried out in August here in Kenya were made public yesterday. So that was in the Star newspaper. So let's look at the Daily Nation, where the headline there is numbers a game, how census affect 2022. Look at that. Now the population, total population, was found to be 47,564,229 people. That is how many people we are here in Kenya. So now Nairobi is leading with 4.3 million people, in excess of 4.3 million people, and Kiambu follows in with in excess of 2.4 people, and Nairobi Nakuru 2.1 people, and Kakamega 1.8 people, and Bungoma 1.6, and of course those are the leading counties: Nairobi, followed by Kiambu, and Nakuru, Kakamega, and Bungoma. And then we go to the low population areas, the counties that registered low population. And this is Lamu, that comes in at 143. I think it's the lowest, I believe. Lamu is the lowest with 143,920, followed by Isiolo. There are 268 and 2 persons. Samburu 310,327, and Tana River 315,943, and Taita Taveta at 340,671 persons there. So there you go. So now, with increasing national population, this is according to the Daily Nation, some counties will lose constituencies as others will gain if the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission retains the formula it used to draw the boundaries, altering the political landscape here. And that story is on page 4, 5, 6, which I know that could be the page today the politicians are really interested in. They've been worried about, because one of the key things that actually led to Mr. Ikuro Court's bill, Punguza Mzigo bill, to be knocked out just from the word go, is because it sought one of the suggestions there was to reduce the number of constituencies we have here in the country. So now, after now the figures are out, now it will be upon the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission to review our boundaries and to adjust accordingly. So that story is on page 4 and 5 of page 4, 5, and 6 of the Daily Nation. And all right, up there on the Daily Nation, more than meets the eye in state versus judiciary war. And Chief Justice David Maraga pained a face in the symbol of judiciary under siege from an executive seemingly determined to cripple it in the fight between the two arms of government. The Kenyans who will not get timely justice will be the biggest losers. And that story is on page 8. I will not get into the details of it, but you can go up there, I think even online, buy the paper online, and you can check and really get the gist of all of that story. And also still on the front pages of the Daily Nation, shock for teachers as TSC cuts ties with NAT. And yes, indeed. So that is just about it. So that is the Daily Nation. And then we go to the Standard newspaper, and census shock for big tribes. I think the same thing that we looked at on the Star newspaper and also on the Daily Nation there about the census shock. And it says that new numbers debunk myths of ethnic blocs, sparking protests among politicians. And some people are like, this census did not really capture the exact Kenyan population. So now it has even taking a very political undertone there. So let's see how that will pan out. As I said, the results of the census that was carried out in August this year, a few months ago here in Kenya, were made public yesterday. So let's just see from today, we'll see some reactions from the different parts of the country. And still there, the story of don't mess with courts, warns defiant Maraga. There, I will not go into the details of it. And TSC gives notice to kill NAT. Also now our teachers union here, the Teacher Service Commission and the Kenya National Union of Teachers have been going at it with each other. If you want to get the details of it, go to page 11 of the Standard newspaper. And Governor Gakuru feared for his life after elections. An inquest told county boss was paranoid because many people who supported his campaigns wanted favors from him. That is the story of an inquiry that is continuing over the death of Governor Gakuru that happened, a while ago. That is on page 11 of the Standard newspaper. And more heavy rains expected in flooded East Africa. And I was just watching the news yesterday, and I've seen some not yesterday, today in the morning in Al Jazeera, and the flooding that is really causing a lot of havoc, even in Somalia. I think we were talking about here yesterday, and how it has been difficult for, even help to reach the people who are supposed to receiving that help there in Somalia. So that is that, and that is what is making headlines in Kenya this morning. So right now, let's just, just turn to the topic of the day here and the legacy of President Uhuru Kenyatta. Well, we've seen some, the housing coming up. I think we talked about it yesterday. I don't know if I should keep repeating what I said yesterday, but the housing project, I think that Kenyans can see, it's happening in different parts of the country. I've seen a couple of locations here in Nairobi where the affordable housing, but also the price tag that has been placed in these houses. I don't know, but it is something that is really happening, and also something very close to President Uhuru Kenyatta's heart, and that is the health, the universal health. Health can be very expensive, and we were talking about it yesterday here before we experienced that, technical hitch yesterday. And so President Uhuru Kenyatta is really trying to make sure that once he retires, which is in less than 3 years now, that Kenyans, especially who get affected when they cannot afford proper health health care when they cannot afford, because some illnesses are very expensive to treat, and even some insurance companies cannot really, the terminal illnesses, you cannot be insured. Sometimes it's very limited. So it's trying to make sure that Kenyans who get affected with a lot of this and are unable to access proper health care, he's trying to improve, the public health care, and from across the country, and he chose a few of the counties to act as a guinea pig where this was going to be tried out. So we're still waiting to see what are the findings of this, affordable health care. It was rolled out in a few counties just to get a gist of it, and so perhaps after that, now the report will be returned to the president, and we will see how that has worked in the few countries that the affordable health care was rolled out, and perhaps the report will be out, or the findings will be out, and then he can see what other things that he could adjust, the government could adjust or do better, or what worked there that could be carried out now and rolled out for the rest of the country. So we're waiting for that. And also, the manufacturing industry. I think if he wanted, what President Uhuru Kenyatta captured for the manufacturing industry, he wanted to base it on the upcoming, what we call here the Juakali industry, which are the backbone of our economy here. So, the manufacturing industry mainly paid much focus on the people there who are actually the bedrock of the economy, the small traders, in a nutshell. That is the Juakali industry here in Kenya, the small traders. So the government found ways to make sure that even the registration, and I think before we had a technical hitch yesterday, we were talking about the Huduma, not the Huduma number, but the Huduma centers that really Kenyans are appreciating, because you get to get all government services at a go without before then you could go to different offices, you're sent to this office. Even if you lose your ID card, like I lost mine in 2006 and then I lost another one in 2017. I was pickpocketed in Nairobi streets in 2017, but the process that I went through in 2006 was so tedious. From one, you go to a police station, you're given an abstract to go have a photocopy and then return, and then after that you're sent to another police station, to take word. So it was just tedious. But when mine was, I lost again in 2017, and I went to a Huduma center. Man, in less than 20 minutes, I was out of there. So that is something that really I think Kenyans will remember President Uhuru Kenyatta with. So that Huduma center have made things very easy, even for the small-scale traders and anybody who wants to come in and register a business here. It used to be very tedious and a lot of bureaucracy in terms of even just getting the legal papers for you to start a business as a Kenyan, even as an outsider. So, but now the Huduma Center will, have made things very easy. And if you ask me, this is just one of the things that I think Kenyans appreciate, and we will remember President Uhuru with when he leaves office. And so let's see. And also it is good news. Yesterday, I think, yesterday as we were looking at the papers, the farmers now are able to sell their crops at a very at a better prices, the maize at a better prices. I think after, that plan to bring in more maize in June was thwarted, and I think we made a lot of noise here about it, and the country was not having it. And so now farmers who planted over the last season are able to actually go out there and have good prices over their, produce being bought by the government granaries and across the country. So that is a good thing. We have to support our local farmers and our local production, because that is the only way we are going to build our economy. And that's why I think President Uhuru Kenyatta felt it's very necessary to make sure that should we achieve this should we be sufficient and in food and have food security, then we have to take care of our farmers. Of course, in the past, there have been cases, which are some of the obstacles, the farmer releases, the government releases, like something like fertilizer in subsidized prices, and then these middlemen buy them and sell them at very, high prices there. So those are just some of the things there that could be impeding, the proper implementation or realization of some of these things, the legacy of President Uhuru Kenyatta. So there you go. So right now, I just want us to look at other things, and Look at the African news making headlines across the country. We've looked at what's making headlines in the country this morning, that is in the Kenya newspapers, and we looked at, the President Uhuru Kenyatta's legacy. So now let's just go straight to what is making headlines across Africa and look at African news. And we start with Uganda, where Uganda's opposition leader Kizza Besigye has tweeted that he has been released after being arrested on Monday. Mr. Besigye tweeted that he was fine and thanked people for his support, but said that this treatment had been a gross abuse of human rights. Now, police detained him after they accused him of parking his vehicle in the middle of the road and inconveniencing other road users in the capital, Kampala. A local journalist, however, reported that Mr. Besigye, who is the leader of the Forum of Democratic Change, was on his way to address supporters when the police confronted him. And we go to Togo, where the pirates off the coast of Togo have kidnapped 4 crew members of a Greek oil tanker. Just days after a similar kidnapping in the waters of neighboring Benin, the Togolese Navy said that the armed attackers boarded the Elka Aristol near the port of Lom after shooting and wounding the ship's security guard. Those abducted including Greek, Georgian and Philippine nationals, and the ship's operator says the rest of the crew and the ship itself are safe, and they are working to ensure the prompt release of their employees. We go to Mozambique, where the Islamist militants in northern Mozambique attacked 3 vehicles last week, killing at least 23 people, according to local media reports. On Thursday, the insurgents ambushed a bus with 13 people inside. The only survivor fled into the bush and ran to a village about 40 kilometers from the scene as the attacker set fire to the vehicle on Saturday. A Land Cruiser was also attacked and 10 passengers killed. 2 women escaped. And we go to Sudan, where Sudan's Prime Minister has become the most senior government figure to visit camps for displaced people in Darfur since the region was devastated by conflict in 2003. Abdallah Hamdok, who took up his post in August, promised to bring peace and economic stability to Darfur. A conflict began there in 2003 when mainly non-Arab tribes took up arms against the former President Omar al-Bashir's Arab-led government. And we go to Nigeria, where Nigeria's land borders will remain closed to trade until at least 31st January 2020. The borders were closed 2 months ago to tackle smuggling, particularly of rice, but the move is having an impact on trade across the region. Nigeria's immediate neighbors, Benin, Niger, Chad, and Cameroon, as well as Ghana and Togo, have all been hit by the crisis. Goods are rotting and queues of lorries are waiting at checkpoints in the hope that the crossing will reopen. Joseph Atta, spokesperson for the Nigerian Customs Service, told news agencies Reuters that although this phase of the closure would end up on 31st January, but it could be extended. The closure contravenes an agreement allowing freedom of movement of goods between 15 members of the West African Regional Bloc, ECOWAS, but restricting the importation of certain food and agricultural products is illegal. And still in Nigeria, Nigeria's Oyo State Police Commandant has uncovered an illegal rehabilitation center at Olore Central Mosque in the Ojo area of Ibadan and rescued over 200 inmates who were reportedly subjected to torture. Monday's discovery was the second such center discovered in the southwest over the last 72 hours after police found a similar detention camp used as a praying center in Lagos, reports Nigeria reports. According to the Prophet, superintendent of the inmates, where he said that the inmates were psychiatric patients. Ibadan State Police Commissioner Shina Olokolo said the discovery of the center followed a tip-off by an anonymous informant. He confirmed that the young men and women freed from the center had been subjected to inhumane treatment and that 5 people suspected to be connected with the Islamic center had been arrested. And we go to Lyberia. Liberian President George Weah on Monday 4th confirmed the imminent return of Air France flight to the West African country. He added that the move is expected to kick off in 2020, was an affirmation of deepening relations between the two countries, and the Liberia is open for business. One of the main reasons that Air France quit the Liberian route 5 years ago was the bad nature of the runway at Monrovia's Roberts International Airport, report another reason was the outbreak of Ebola in the West Africa at that time. And we go to Guinea, where a 17-year-old was shot dead on Monday during clashes between security forces and protesters at a funeral march in Guinea for victims of violence in recent demonstrations against President Alpha Conde, the opposition and his family have said. Violence erupted after hundreds marched in the capital Conakry to accompany coffins of people killed in more than a week of demonstrations over suspicions that President Alpha Conde is seeking to prolong his rule in the West African country. And then we look at South Sudan, and the war-torn South Sudan is barreling towards a crisis and could slide back into fighting, warned the International Crisis Group yesterday. The new report said the country's warring parties aren't ready to form a coalition government on November 12th, and when opposition leader Riek Machar is planned to return and once again serve as President Kiir's deputy, as part of a power-sharing agreement to pull the country out of a 5-year civil war that has killed almost 400,000 people. And of course, and meanwhile reports indicate that the latest rounds of face-to-face talks between the two rivals is set for the Ugandan capital Kampala at the beckoning of Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni. And we go to Rwanda, where a former senior Rwandan official went on trial in Belgium yesterday, accused of taking part in the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in his country. Friends and relatives of the alleged victims of 71-year-old Fabien Neretse were present as he arrived at the Brussels court leaning on a crutch. For the first time in a Belgian case, Neretse is explicitly charged with genocide over 13 alleged murders between April and July 1994. He was arrested in France in 2011, but was not in detention and presented himself at a court, and he has since denied all the charges. And now the U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin is expected to host the foreign ministers of Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan, as well as the president of the World Bank Group, David Malpass, in Washington on Wednesday for a discussion about a giant hydropower dam and project on the Nile River. The controversial project in Ethiopia's section of the river has been the focus of an escalating feud between Ethiopia and Egypt over scarce water resources. The Trump administration sent a letter on October 21st to the three countries and Malpass to try to find a resolution to the dispute after Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi asked President Trump to mediate. Cairo considers the issue a national security matter because it believes Ethiopia's planned construction of the massive upstream Nile Dam could threaten Egypt's source of fresh water. And we go to Guinea-Bissau, where the United Nations Security Council yesterday joined regional voices calling for restraint and dialogue to end the latest political crisis in the West African nation of Guinea-Bissau. The president, Jose Mario Vaz, triggered the latest escalation in a ongoing power struggle with the ruling African Party of the Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde Party, of which he was once a member. Late Tuesday last week, he dismissed Prime Minister Aristides Gomes and named a replacement from a minority political party. But Gomes has refused to step down, escalating tensions ahead of an already delayed presidential election that has been scheduled now for November 24th. And we go to Cameroon, where authorities have said calm has returned to Douala after over 2 days of violence orchestrated by armed gangs. The different groups of gangs are reported to have stormed the streets of Douala on Friday, November 1st, 2019, terrorizing the population with machetes, knives, and other sharp objects. Reacting to this defiant behavior, the governor of the littoral region, Samuel Diodone Ivana, sensitized the youths on the disadvantage of peace and living together, urging them to respect the law. And then we end with Zimbabwe, where Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa has been advised to replace his entire cabinet, not merely organize a reshuffle as he was reportedly planning to do. Addressing ruling party ZANU-PF youth at a party headquarters in Harare recently, Mnangagwa commended youth in his current cabinet, complimenting them for doing a good job. And that is the latest from Africa this morning. If there's anything else that I've left out there, kindly feel free to have your voice here and share with me, and then we can have these conversations. Thank you so much. I see who here. I see Ndundi, and you're saying good morning to you, Punchline Africa TV, and indeed a very good morning to you, Ndundi, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. Moses Samuel is saying Nigeria border remain closed forever. Africans have to look down on us too much. Oh, Africans have looked down on us too much. So you agree with the move by the Nigerian government to close the border from any other import coming in the country from other countries across Africa, and these countries are member states of the ECOWAS that Nigeria is a member there. So okay, Peter Chinwoba, you're saying all hail Biafra, and the rest of you, thank you so much. Graham. Okay, Grant Susu, you're saying you love the staycation so much, but you don't know why. To me, they give it to us as it is. They tell the truth all the times. All right, thank you so much, I guess. Thank you so much. And Prince, there you're saying ICC is an international criminal company that use Africa for granted. And yes, Mark John, you're saying never again in Ambazonia. So continue writing to us and let me know where you're watching us from this morning. It's just a few minutes to top of the hour here in Nairobi. And I was just going through what is making headlines. Earlier on, we started with Kenya, looking at the newspapers, and then we looked at, the legacy of Uhuru Kenyatta and what's really going on there and the latest updates there, and what some of the obstacles that, realizing this big four, that I think it's very, very important. President Uhuru Kenyatta has come out very, very clearly and said, you know what, this is something that he would want to be remembered with here when he leaves office. And then we were just going through what was making headlines here in Africa. And so we started with Uganda. So yesterday, the official opposition figure there, Mr. Kizza Besigye, I think was arrested after he tried to address a crowd, some journalists were, I think, arrested, were also protesting against the arrest of their colleagues who were covering, the recent protest by Makerere University students who I think were protesting over the increase of fees. I'm not sure, but they were protesting. So the journalists that were covering that story were arrested. And so yesterday, opposition leader perhaps saw a very good opportunity since, these young people are agitated and they thought this would be the right time. I don't know in which country, but certainly not in Uganda. He thought that would be the right time for him to go there and try to talk. And so while he was trying to do that, of course, the police blocked him. And now the Uganda's opposition leader was, arrested, and he tweeted that he had been released after being arrested on Monday. And Mr. Besigye tweeted that he was fine and thanked the people who were there to support him and said that his treatment had been a gross abuse of human rights. That is quite a foreign word there in Uganda. And police detained him after they accused him of parking his vehicle in the middle of the road. Remember, they blocked the entourage of Mr. Besigye, but now the police said, and he was actually addressing a crowd of people from a rooftop of the car that he was using. So the police said, you know what, you're blocking traffic, and perhaps he did not choose the right spot to go do that. Maybe it was in the middle of a busy street, I'm not sure. I don't know Uganda very well. And so the police took him for parking his vehicle in the middle of the road. The guy was addressing a crowd. He was not parking there, but he said he was so apparently he broke some traffic rules there, because he was parking in the middle of the road. and inconveniencing other users in the capital, Kampala. So a local journalist, however, reported that Mr. Besigye, who is the leader of the Forum for Democratic Change, was on his way to address supporters when the police confronted him. So it is the confrontation from the police that perhaps made him stop. I'm not sure. But, I was just watching the images there that has been shared widely on social media, where Mr. Besigye, while he was addressing the crowd from the rooftop of the car that he was in, the police came there with the water cannons, and they really was spraying him with this water, and that was quite something there, a scene to behold. Very interesting. So anyway, he was arrested, but he has been released. That was yesterday. So all right, so we go to Mozambique, where there has been some, interesting things that has been happening here in terms of the security of the country, and the Islamic State has really found its way there. And I was just watching, I think, a documentary yesterday before I came to work early in the morning about how they get to recruit these young people from Mozambique, and now it's really growing its tentacles there in Mozambique. And you've seen a few of bombings here and there, and also that caused some security concerns even when the country was going to its elections that happened on the 15th of October last month. But anyway, that has since been contested, and I don't know, the Renamo, the opposition party, has said it will go to court. I don't know yet if it has filed, but to challenge the results of that election. But anyway, this is something that was worrying even the leadership of that country towards the elections there. The security in some parts of Mozambique that now has been infiltrated by this militant group and are posing a serious security challenge in Mozambique. And this has become something, this militant group that are emerging from different, not just African countries, but across the globe. It has become a serious, it is a global security threat now. And I think that we should not imagine that because your country does not have Al-Shabaab, or because your country does not have IS or ISIS or Boko Haram, you think you're safe. No, they seems to have an agenda, and they want to reach out across every possible country that they could get a hold. All they need is a desperate youth. All they need to get is a youth that feel have been marginalized by the government. All they need to get is a youth that feels that, you know what, these people are not speaking my language, but these new persons here seems to be understanding my problems and seems to, speaking to what I believe or what the injustice that I've been going. All they need to get is somebody that is vulnerable, that is jobless, from the documentary I was watching yesterday, they actually were targeting drug addicts, so they will take you and go try to rehabilitate you. And of course, a lot of drug addicts there are jobless, and so all they need, and they'll use the propaganda, and they'll just brainwash you at that point, and they will have you join this militant group. So this is a growing global concern that should concern all of us, regardless whether our countries have been affected or not. Us here, we've been dealing with the scourge of Al-Shabaab, that has its root there in Somalia. So it has been very difficult. But so far, I think we have been able to contain it. The government of Kenya has been able to contain it. There were times you were even scared to be in a public space because you would not know at what time will the grenade go off at a bus stop or at a market or at a school. So we were becoming very paranoid and very worried about our security. But so far, the government has been able to contain this menace. So every now and then, it's just hear cases, but thank God they're not as rampant, so that's a good job. And I think also Kenyan security intelligence really have improved, because we've seen a few times where the police have come out and said they thwarted a plan that Al-Shabaab was planning, and you can see the paraphernalia, the weapons of mass destruction that they recovered from their hideouts and things like that. So it is a good thing, and that has challenged especially our police here and the authorities and the intelligence in this country to really be on the lookout. And so far, I think it has bore some fruits. So that also is a good thing. So this is not just a problem here, as we see in Mozambique, but I think it is something that should worry us as Africans. And why is it that these terrorist groups are finding a very fertile ground here in Africa to build base and to recruit our people? Because when they sit down and they watch this news and they see how African young people are crossing the ocean, the Mediterranean, to the other side of the world, because they're running away from persecution, they're running away from hunger, they're running away from the lack of jobs, they're running away from the bad governance, they're running away from tyrannic regimes in the different African countries we're having. And so when they sit down and they look at that, I think they imagine, you know what? Yeah, I think Africa is the place to be. While the rest of the world is looking at us as a place to be, to come and invest, and the opportunities the potential opportunities that they're seeing in Africa. Also, such groups are seeing another potential in the youth that have been, feeling, you know what, perhaps there's something better out there. So when they can get such people and talk a language that seems to address whatever their concerns are, then that's why Africa youth have become a very thriving sport when it comes to even recruiting of members of this militant group. So it is a concern, across the board, and it should concern us as Africans. So there it is. The IS, that is the Islamic State, has been very active in some parts of Mozambique. And so yesterday they attacked and they killed about 23 people. No, not yesterday, but sometimes back last week. But also I think over the weekend they also did that. So there it is. And now we move to Sudan, where Sudan's Prime Minister has become the most senior government figure to visit camps for displaced people in Darfur. First of all, why are we still having people in camps after they were displaced in 2003 in Darfur in their own country? Why are we still having people who were displaced? Even Kenya here, we had some displacements that happened in 2007, 2008, after we were going through that a very, trying time in this country. And I think the darkest time that our country has ever seen since gaining independence. And a lot of Kenyans were really hurt, and a lot of them were killed. And others were displaced because of the different political rhetorics we see in this country. And that's why I think we need to be very, very careful, even when we are speaking out there and when we're seeing, like right now in Kenya, when you look at what is happening in the judiciary, and then you look at the political dynamics in this country, I think as a Kenyan, I am genuinely worried, because some of these things they're playing politics with. But at the end of the day, it goes to affect us as Kenyans. So I think that even the leadership of this country needs to get its act together and just make sure that we don't start planting these things, we don't allow some of these vices to start manifesting in Kenyans, because it will not be very good for this country. But anyway, so far, even the people that were internally displaced, majority of them were repaid by the government and were, placed elsewhere. Of course, a lot of them did not return to their previous homes they were afraid. And even though, even after, and majority of them were displaced from the Rift Valley province, even after President Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto ran together as a duo for the presidency, still that did not give a lot of confidence to the people that were displaced in those areas. And they still drive around and you see somebody still living in your house that you built. You see somebody is farming on the farm that you had for years, that you worked all of your life to get. So those are just some of the things, and I think that is what the BBI wants to address. I hope it will go all the way down and actually really go to the root causes of these problems. And so that's the only way that we can finally talk about justice. So we've seen a lot of Kenyans that were affected being, placed elsewhere, and so we don't have really Kenyans still in camps, in IDP camps. I don't think we have that here in this country, and others from some other parts of the country felt that they were not compensated. But but you still don't have like the internally displaced people here in Kenya, still not yet. Even if it is, but the number is minimal. But I don't think we don't have the camps here anyway. So in 2003, the war happened in Darfur, and so yesterday, Prime Minister of Sudan, Mr. Abdallah Hamdok, was actually the first most senior government figure to visit camps for displaced people in Darfur. As in, the former President Omar al-Bashir never took his time to go to Darfur and see what was happening there with his people. Since all that time he was in power. Since 2003, this Hamdok is the highest political figure or, figure from Sudan to go to since 2003. I don't even see how, I'm just trying to reconcile that. You tell me how these people will not feel marginalized by the government. You tell me how we will not find youths from this area who will be radicalized. You tell me, because that is how you nurture radicalism. That is how it comes about. Like the rest of the country is going on as if nothing happened. And yet, since 2003, there are still some IDP, some refugees in camps in Darfur. Come on now. So anyway, the conflict began in 2003 when mainly non-Arab tribes took up arms against the former President Omar al-Bashir-led government. And no wonder Omar al-Bashir did not want to set foot there, but still, you are the head of state. And the head of state is the unifying figure in a country. Even right now, there are people in this country who really wouldn't care 2 cents about even hearing anything that President Uhuru Kenyatta has to say from some parts of this country, but because they don't feel like they've voted for him, he's not in their party. But as the head of state in this country, President Uhuru Kenyatta has tried to extend himself across board, even in places which were a bit hostile towards him. So he's been able to pull everyone back, because a head of state should not be, taking sides. And because you're a head of state doesn't mean the whole country will agree with you. So anybody who wants to vie for a presidency should know that. And because everybody will not agree with you does not mean now that you have to marginalize that part. You as the head of state still must stay on your mandate as the head of state and make sure that you serve all people in your country. So anyway, I think after the revolt that came from that part of the country, Omar al-Bashir said, you know what, I don't even care. Because you led this revolt against my Arab-led government, and so therefore people, you can just eat your own tomatoes. So it's a good thing that now the Prime Minister Hamdok is reaching out to this part of Sudan. So let's just see if that will, bring some peace and some semblance of reconciliation, or it will be a good start toward realizing a united Sudan. And of course, the Prime Minister's visit is a sign that the authorities now in charge of Sudan are determined to finally end the suffering in the Darfur region, which began when the war broke in 2003. At camps, which are still home to 1.5 million people. It's not a few hundreds, it's not a few thousands. 1.5 million people. So I'm happy by this move by Sudan's Prime Minister. So this should be a start of good tidings there in Sudan, and just reconciling and bringing justice. And those who participated, even from the people in Darfur who are part of people who brought this war, and the other side also. I think that it is time that Sudan found a way to just come together and rebuild and make sure that everybody is included in the rebuilding of the new Sudan. And so we go to Nigeria, and I think this matter we talk. I've read here maybe 3-4 times, but it seems to be, I don't know why it's not making huge headlines. So I watched it yesterday on Al Jazeera. Just this show they have is called Counting the Cost. I think it's one of my favorites. And also today they were looking at counting the cost and in the health sector, and I think they featured Zimbabwe's collapsing health sector and other things. But it's very interesting. So they featured this, and then this Nigerian news matter here. And Nigeria's land borders remain closed to trade until 31st of January 2020. The borders were closed 2 months ago to tackle smuggling, particularly of rice, but the move is having an impact on trade across the region. So it is just rice that made the Nigerian government close this border. And, they were coming into the country, that is according to the government, and then they were being repackaged to appear as though they were from Nigeria. I think that was one of their concerns. And Nigeria's immediate neighbors, Benin, Niger, Chad, and Cameroon, as well as Ghana and Togo, have all been hit by a crisis. I do not understand what is happening there in the ECOWAS, economic bloc there. I don't get it. Now, goods are rotting and queues of lorries are waiting at checkpoints in the hope that the crossing will reopen. And we talked about this yesterday. ECOWAS earlier this year had a meeting and said they will have one currency that will be called ECO, and also they're looking for one bloc and all that perhaps finally we can realize one united Africa, which I think we talked about here yesterday. I will not even get into the details of it. But now you see this, and yesterday I think the news that we were looking at was the shops of Nigerians that were being closed down in Ghana, in Ghana there, the shops that are being owned by Nigerians, and it is the second time that this has been happening this year, and the business community in Nigeria and Ghana, they are feeling the Ghanaian authorities are being very unfair. And even after that happened the first time in June, I didn't see the Ghanaian government coming out and addressing this. So maybe Ghanaian government is consigning over this matter. So we saw it happening over the weekend and sometimes back last week, just arbitrarily closing down a business because for no reason at all. Because I think if these people were breaking the laws there in Ghana, then they will just have a put it forward to the authorities that could handle it. So now we see here again Nigeria closing its borders, the land borders. Like, you cannot come in with any goods from anywhere. You cannot bring in goods or pass through Nigeria if you're going to another country, and you cannot, and so with the call for Africa to be united, and the free economic what do you call it, that was signed, that Nigeria actually was the last person to sign it. They did not want to do it. But now when you see things like this, you can understand where Nigeria, was putting its eggs, which basket, because the open economic, the free trade that Africa has signed and was really such a huge thing to us, realizing a strong economic bloc in Africa. But when you look at such matters, and once we realize this, because it has not come into effect, they're still working on the modalities, but once you see such things happening, is it going to be really a reality? Or these are just some of the obstacles or things that, the member states or the rest of Africa should look at and see, do we have structures in place that could be, will able to manage and mitigate against such things? Because we cannot purport to have a free economic zone while you cannot agree for my goods to pass or to come to your country while yours are coming to my country. I think that will not work very well. So this, I think, will beat I don't know how this African free trade zone, I don't know how this will work with such matters now, with countries closing down their borders, with the countries closing down other countries' businesses in their countries, like in the case of Ghana, closing down the businesses of Nigerians, like I have said there, and now Nigeria closing its borders from the rest of the countries, Benin, Niger, Chad, Cameroon, Ghana, and Togo. All these countries have been affected, and Nigeria, being one of the biggest economies here in Africa, I think it's very paramount. So this is not a small feat. This affects the countries that are, part of this, that have been trading with Nigeria in extents that we cannot understand. I don't know if this will affect the Nigerian economy, but I'm sure, I don't know if it's a lose-win situation, a win for Nigeria and a loss for other countries, or it's a lose-lose, but you know what, that is what is happening there in Nigeria. But I'm hoping that these countries, especially through ECOWAS, which has 15 members there, can come together and, talk about this. I don't know why they have not constituted an urgent meeting to address this matter, because this has been happening for a while. This is probably the fourth time I'm talking about this here in the last 2 months or so. So it's 2 months when borders have been closed for business people. That's a mighty long time and mighty long losses. And I was reading here, and there are foods or things that have a very short life span. So if you keep putting things there, it is said that now goods are rotting and queues of lorries are waiting at checkpoints in the hope that the crossing will reopen. Now the Nigerian government has come out and said, you keep waiting, because you will wait until the 31st of January 2020. That is when we are intending to open our borders. And we're not really sure. It's not like our word is written on stone yet. yet. We're just projecting that perhaps we might. So they're not really giving the word fully on this. So ECOWAS leadership needs to really, I think, look at this. Because before it has other effects on other things that are related. And remember, the ECOWAS member states are there, the countries there, a lot of them have been affected by the scourge of Boko Haram and other insecurities that affect the different countries there. So such moves might even hinder or curtail, negate the progress that has been made, especially in coming together of these countries and fighting even things like Boko Haram or other insecurity matters there. So it's not just the trade, because some other countries might try to retaliate in different ways. So this is something that should be handled because there are a lot of players there involved, and it is affecting a whole economic, dynamic of a whole region there that I think is quite important for the rest of Africa. So hey, you guys might handle that. So anyway, that is that. So let's just also in Nigeria, and I think this is quite disturbing. And also this is a news that I've read here over and over and over in different situations. And yesterday, Nigeria's Oyo State Police Commandant discovered or uncovered an illegal rehabilitation center at Olore Central Mosque in the Ojo area of Ibadan and rescued about 200 inmates who were reportedly subjected to torture. Like mosques have become, or prayer centers purport to be prayer centers. Not all mosques, that just particular people who are recruiting young men, and there were others who were rescued, and so even young boys, kids as young as 7, 8, 9 being on shackles and they're bound. And I think this has been going on for a long time. No wonder we have so many members in Boko Haram. No wonder Boko Haram is able to recruit people freely, because Boko Haram is a group that is based on ideology of whatever they think their version of Islam is, and mostly drawn from the Wahhabis there. But you know what? So these centers, and now it's just from the recent past, the Nigerian police and the Nigerian government is discovering a lot of these centers. I don't know how you keep 200 people in a village, in a place, in that state of affairs, and nobody even raises alarm to the police. For others, like there is a center that was uncovered that had held these people for over a year. Like, how does your 10-year-old, your 15-year-old disappear going to a religious place, I don't know, for worship or what, a whole street here, and you don't even raise this matter with the police? You don't. What is wrong with us? What is wrong with this with people here? Because that is not very usual. So I don't know. They're targeting people who are not very literate, who don't understand even religion in totality, who don't understand what's happening in the world, who is out. I don't know. Maybe that could be their target group, the people who are vulnerable, because when you don't have the information, not truly empowered. So. Okay. Somebody's telling me there that the businesses that were affected in Ghana are not Nigerians, but are Biafrans. I think I said that yesterday. Okay, but thank you so much, Mr. Giko Chukudi there. You're saying good morning, Punchline Africa TV, my favorite station. And thank you so much for watching us. We appreciate your support. And you're saying you're watching from Togo, and in line with the news, Miriam, you're reading out Ghana. I should note that business people there are not Nigerians, but Biafrans. So it's not Biafrans, businesses that were affected there in Nigeria that were closed down. I don't know if they've opened them yet. And this is the second time. It happened again in June this year, and it is happening again. And what is worrying is because the Ghanaian government has not come out really to castigate this move or give a statement, so that means they could be consigning on what is happening there to these people. Yeah, because it is something that is making headlines worldwide. So I'm sure it has come to the attention of the Ghanaian authorities, and the fact that the country, the presidency or the Minister of Trade or who should be responsible to handle that has not come out clearly and addressed this matter. That means perhaps they are okay with what is happening, and in the realization or in the spirit of even ECOWAS or just, in that part of the world, then that negates everything that perhaps ECOWAS stands for. or any other economic bloc there that those countries are part of there in West Africa and some parts there in West Africa. So anyway, as I was talking about these illegal rehabilitation centers, and so one of the people there, the leaders, he's a prophet, and he's a superintendent of the camp. Like, are you serious? That is already militarized, and he's saying that this patient, the inmates, like they're called inmates in a mosque. They're saying that they are psychiatric patients, so I think they needed to be taught a different ideology, or like what China is doing. Have you seen this news that has been coming from China about Chinese taking all Muslims there, or because you can't practice other religions very freely in China? Like the freedom of press, the freedom of religion and worship is really, really curtailed there and very, very controlled in China. So they have been taking the Chinese Muslims and putting them in rehabilitation centers to try and, what do you call it? There's a word for it. So, it's interesting. So these are camps, or these are centers that you can't even find in Google Map. The Chinese government have made sure that you can't even Google and find. But of course, there's some other people who understand these things that are able to. So they're taken in a camp, and then you're taught, because you're taught, I don't know, Buddhism or what, but they try not to. And then there's a time they passed a law where they're saying women cannot wear clothes that are longer past their knees, and because Muslim women, they wear the long dresses and clothes, they're religious, traditional, cultural, dressing. So it was seen to be targeting the Muslims there. So very interesting. So you see here in Nigeria, these camps that it's not the first time. This happened yesterday in Ibadan State, and over 200 people were in these camps. I don't understand how somebody goes missing, or a whole maybe 3-4 young men are missing in a village for quite some time, and you don't even raise this matter with the police. Come on now. People have to cooperate sometimes with the authorities, because these are illegal camp centers. It was supposed to be sort of like a religious Muslim center, but it turned out it is all run by extremists who are there and trying to indoctrinate, yes, that is the right word, these young men there. So now 200 of them, inmates. I don't know why it's even inmates, because they're in a mosque. Why are they inmates? But anyway, they were shackled up, and they even had a special uniform, I guess, and so they appeared really like inmates, and so they were discovered in the southwest. This is the second center in 72 hours that had been discovered. So I think this is something, that is how Boko Haram gets its members, recruits its members. So they've been using these centers. I think it's just now that the Nigerian government is realizing, but I hope it's not too late, and they'll be able to even look out for more, and perhaps the public there can cooperate with the government. Okay, and so we look at Lyberia, and of course, Liberian President George Weah yesterday has confirmed that Air France will be returning its flights to the country, and after quite a while. And the main reason why Air France stopped its flights to Liberia is because, one, the air strip there, the runway there was not par the standard. It had potholes, and it was just in bad nature. But of course, former president before now, George Weah, Miss Salif, I think she tried to rehabilitate it. So I think now it has met the standards there, and Liberia Air France has decided, we'll have our flights coming there to, back to Liberia. There's something here that almost escaped my attention that I think is very important, and we should talk about it. I've read it here in passing in some of the news, and we've not gone into it very, very deeply. And this is about the Nile Dam, the controversy there, that the feud that is now building, especially between Ethiopia and Egypt. So let me just read it and then tell you which part that really, The U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin is expected to host the foreign ministers of Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan, as well as the president of the World Bank, Mr. David Malpass. That is supposed to be happening in Washington tomorrow on Wednesday for a discussion about a giant hydropower dam project of the Nile River. Now, the controversial project in Ethiopia's section of the river has been the focus of an escalating feud between Ethiopia and Egypt over scarce water resources. And that is okay until there. Well, the first part, So now, the Trump administration sent a letter on October 21st to the three countries and the World Bank Group president, Mr. Malpass. So the same letter was sent to the World Bank president to try and find a resolution to the dispute after Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi asked President Donald Trump to mediate. Now, that is the part that really gave me chills. If it is Ethiopia that perhaps approached the U.S., if it is Sudan that perhaps approached the U.S., but this is the chairperson of the African Union, an organization that is mandated in finding resolutions to the problems here in Africa, an organization that is mandated with mediating in the different problems we're having here in Africa. Until at that point, this feud has been going on. At what point did Mr. el-Sisi sit down and think, you know what? There's no way I can get solution here in Africa. There's no way I can get the AU organs in the AU that he chairs as the chairperson of AU, for him to have reached out to the United States and asked for President Donald Trump. Are you even serious? Does Mr. Donald Trump even know where the Nile River is? To be very honest, this matter, I'm very much so disappointed, because for this one reason, Mr. el-Sisi is the chair of African Union, which I think could have found a solution to this dispute, would have found another, even the deputy, chair or whatever, to come and mediate, on this matter. And if not, another African body to come, or people to come and mediate over this matter. But for him to have reached out to the United States and to President Donald Trump specifically, but just outside Africa, for him to have sought out a matter that involves him and other African nations, for him to have thought that help can only come from outside there, goes out to confirm what we've been talking about here every other day. Now, from this move, according to how I see it, even el-Sisi himself does not have confidence in the African Union and its bodies and its mandate in Africa and its capabilities here to resolve matters. This is a vote of no confidence to the AU by the AU chairperson, who has a problem with another African country. But instead of trying to find way and solutions here in Africa as the African Union chairperson, he goes out there and seeks for the United States, Mr. Donald Trump, who couldn't even point the position of the Nile River in the map of Africa. Please, what is this? So how are we supposed to have confidence in the African Union? How are we supposed to sit pretty as Africans in this country and say, you know what, African Union out there is doing a good job in representing me, if its own chairperson does not have the confidence of the institution that he's chairing, that he's leading right now, he's having a dispute, not with France, not with another country outside of Africa, but with another African country that they share a border with. They share a very important resource, which is the Nile River, and it's a very legit dispute that they're having. But for LCC to think it was okay to get a different non-African country to come in and resolve this matter, that is how we get ourselves fried. Now, Ethiopia has been trying to build on its side, a project, a hydropower project on its side. And of course, Egypt has been opposing this, and it's saying that this will affect Egypt's only source of water there. And so, only source of fresh water there for Egypt. And so, Cairo considers this a matter of national security. Now look at that. When you start putting things like that, you're already creating a narrative that might start drumming up the drums of war, you understand? Because when you're bringing national security here, that is now very heavy. It's not just a water dispute anymore or a hydropower plant anymore that Ethiopia is seeking to do. This is something that is going to affect our national unity, and that is when the Egyptian army might be put on guard. Who knows? So now this matter, as Egypt considers it a national security matter, and because it believes Ethiopia's planned construction of the massive upstream and the Nile Dam could threaten, of course, as I said there, Egypt's source of fresh water. And Nile River is the only source of fresh water. As much as I think Egypt might be having a very legitimate, concern there over the construction of this hydropower, but for the Egyptian president, Mr. Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, who is also the chairperson of the African Union, a body that is supposed to be finding solution to this continent, a body that is supposed to mediate. No wonder they couldn't even mediate in the matter in South Sudan, in Sudan. No wonder they've been very relaxed when it comes to what is happening in South Sudan. No wonder they couldn't even find a solution, and they even abandoned the Democratic Republic of Congo after the elections that happened last year towards the inauguration and the mixed signals that they gave there. No wonder we find ourselves in these different quagmires and positions and the chaos that we find ourselves in Africa, because the body and the people that we elect to sit there and make sure in case there's a situation here, they can come in and try to contain it and find solutions on our behalf. But if the same body and the same people we elect, and we that are there to represent us, and now Mr. El-Sisi, who even by this move, as I have said there earlier, this tells me, or this should say to us as Africans, that he does not have faith in an organization that he is chairing. He has no faith in African Union. For him to have reached out to the US to be the mediator, and Mr. Donald Trump, I don't understand. He does not understand anything about Africa. Please, he can't even point where the Nile River is. Did you see him during the hurricane that was happening there, the latest hurricane in the US, and the way he even tried to to add his own borders and include other states that were not going to be affected? Like, he's ridiculous. For you to even think that Stephen Mnuchin will even find a solution and over this dispute, while they lack understanding about the African matters, they lack, and you can tell by how sometimes they talk, they lack the facts about Africa and how they look at these matters. It's all the same way if you had brought it and bring genuine mediators from Africa here who are concerned, one, with the unity of Africa as a country, and two, perhaps not so much about the opportunity they might accrue from that, because perhaps the US had seen an opportunity that they might come in and there's something they might gain there. As we've said here before, these foreign powers, they only look out for their own interests. And until we realize that as Africans, they will continue taking advantage of us and our resources. Having said that, I'm deeply, deeply disappointed by the AU chairperson, Mr. Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, reaching out to the United States to be the mediator of this feud between Egypt, Ethiopia, and also Sudan. I think has been dragged into it because they all share this. And so I'm very saddened by this. And this, he's simply telling us, you know what? We don't have to trust in AU. We don't have to believe in what is happening in AU. So now perhaps they should give us solutions. So right now, I'll take a very short break. And when we come back, we'll just look at the rest of the stories. And then we still have like a half an hour to go. So please don't go too far. Good morning, Africa. We'll be right back.
Zimbabwe's economy is cursed because we have a bad leadership running the treasury of the people of Zimbabwe. President Emmerson Mnangagwa should have picked a person who understands the political, social, economic apparatus of what the economy of Zimbabwe needs. President Emmerson Mnangagwa would have been able to walk out of this quagmire of the economy by picking a leader, a person who is able to manage the economy. The current Minister of Finance is a parrot of George Soros, Brent Woods institutions. He cannot run the economy. A person who always talks of hiked prices, hiked percentage, hiked fuel, cannot help you in a struggle where regime change is near the doorsteps. President Emmerson Mnangagwa, dear brother, time has come to change the direction. The Zimbabwe economy is the Waterloo of the government of Zimbabwe. It is important, therefore, for us to do what we call fatigue evaluation. Is there a need for fatigue evaluation? Is the system moving forward? Is there an investment that is coming as it was, as people were willing to come with investment? It is very shocking at this age that America is piling pressure and sanctions on Zimbabwe, that the same American people, through a proxy, send one to be the chairman of Zimbabwe Reserve Bank, or the Central Bank of Zimbabwe. I want to ask, what is this that we Africans get confused when it comes to the direction of our own policies? Here is a country that has hammered sanctions, and here we are. We have got their own native coming to manage our and micromanage our finances to find out why we went wrong. But then he's not going to tell America to remove sanctions before he manages the same place. Are we cursed? I believe the people of Zimbabwe, I believe the president will look at this and review the appointment of Mr. Mark Holzman. Mr. Mark Holzman can be very good in Rwanda, but he cannot be very good in Zimbabwe. He will bring you the mobs and the millions of people on the streets of Harare if you allow him to run your economy or your finances. Thank you. African leaders are on their way to Japan for TICAD conference that takes place, or is taking place in Japan this week. This was a conference that was initiated by Japan in 1993 and continues to rotate between Japan and Africa, which is co-ventured by the United Nations, World Bank, and other international UNDP bodies of the world. But the most important thing that comes out as African leaders jet into Japan is, do we benefit much from these conferences? How many people in Africa do benefit from these conferences? One strand of the reasoning of the School of Thought of Africa, Africa School of Thought, is the conferences are very good area of discussion, of reviewing and fatigue evaluation of what projects have been done and what projects need to be done. But the question remains, do we really tangibly see the fruits coming out to the ordinary citizens of Africa? This last night, I had a tweet with Madame Byanyima, who is the executive director of Oxfam. She sent out a tweet to say, can friends write how many sins, 7 sins that the G7 have committed to bring about the hardships in the world? Believe me or not, in that conference there was a Ramaphosa in Paris, and a Ramaphosa was not recognized until it has made news internationally about Ramaphosa's recognition and being called an identified person. Does Africa learn from these hiccups, mishaps that occur in these conferences? That is one strand. The second strand are countries that are inviting us to go to their places. Are they inviting us because of the rivalry between the superpowers themselves? I've only seen almost all the superpowers have been inviting people for the French conference, American conference, Africa conference, China Africa conference, Russia Africa conference, now Japan Africa conference. To these conferences come in good heart. We have seen conferences being duplicated. Qatar Africa conference, Saudi Arabia Africa conference, UAE Africa conference. These conferences must teach us something. And the something that we must be taught is Africa must begin to hold and host AU, Africa Summit Conference, where the big leaders can come and view and see what can be done on the continent. It will help us, it will make us very valuable, expressing our values, putting forward our values, what Africa stands for. As much as I encourage the discussions, and hopefully African leaders will learn from what experiences that Japan has gone through from the Second World War, being bombed upside down to a superpower in the world in terms of trade, in terms of economy, in terms of defense security. I believe Africa can do the same. And I believe one day we shall have the Africa Summit calling all the superpowers, including the heads of states of those countries in the world, to come to our African continent. Thank you.
Thank you so much and welcome back. Just in case you're joining us, this is Good Morning Africa show, where we bring you what is making headlines across Africa and indeed across where we are today here. Where we are located here in the Kenya's capital in Nairobi. And when we started on the show, we looked at the news making headlines in the three leading newspapers here in Kenya. And also we looked at President Uhuru Kenyatta's Big Four agendas and some of the obstacles and some of the things that just an update in regards to the Big Four agenda, which President Uhuru Kenyatta is really seeking to have this to be the legacy after he leaves office, that Kenyans will remember that during this time when President Uhuru Kenyatta served, these 10 years he was in power, this is how he was able to change our lives and to better our lives. So that has been his focus here in the country, and we've seen a lot of talking about obstacles have been coming from sometimes his own people in the backyard who have been working and not in line with what President Uhuru Kenyatta's vision for the country, but a lot of time he's been receiving a lot of, people not agreeing with what he's saying, and a lot of these people are considered to be coming from his own party and his own backyard, and it is seen that they've not been very supportive of President Uhuru Kenyatta's Big Four agenda. So that is it. And also we've looked at some news making headlines across Africa. We looked at the state of affairs in Nigeria. Nigeria has for a while now, closed all its land borders from countries that have been affected by this closure. You can't trading, so you can't just come in with your truck if you're bringing anything in Nigeria or you're passing through Nigeria. And the countries that have been affected by this closure is Benin, Niger, Chad, and Cameroon, also Togo and Ghana. And we've also looked at Nigeria and these very illegal rehabilitation centers that are religious, and I think they're used to, radicalize young. I don't know how else to put it, but I hope that Nigerian government gets on it and make sure that they don't spread, because it is centers like this that give rise and the spread of Boko Haram, because it is from such centers that they get to recruit new members. And what is worrying is even the ages of the young men that are being found in these places, which are sometimes quite very young. So also the members of public there must be very vigilant, and in case you see young men disappearing from your villages or something that is unusual, you owe it to yourself to go to the authorities and report these matters. That is how you can deter the growth of such very dangerous things in our society, not just there in Nigeria but across Africa. I think sometimes we're just tired of our day-to-day life saying being in Africa is work. I'm an African and I'm a very, very proud African, but sometimes there are things that we have to put up with. Sometimes can just make you feel like, I'm just surviving in this country. So sometimes we become so detached from what is happening that we don't find the need to participate or to be part of anything in the different countries. But hey, we owe it our security. As President Uhuru Kenyatta here once told Kenyans, security begins with you. And many people didn't understand. And I remember he was criticized so much when he said this. During that time, we were dealing with grenades going off every so often in the different places, especially here in Nairobi. So he said, security begins with you. If you're living near somebody and or your neighbor or something, and you see something is suspicious, and you become quiet and don't report it you'd rather just report it to the police and then let them say it is nothing, instead of you suspecting that something has a potential to hurt people or to cause harm to not just you, but to your neighbor or other people in the country, and then you're just quiet. We should take that. And maybe you're not patriotic enough, but also that comes from, I think, our experiences with these governments, our experiences with our leaders, the bad economic situations that we feel the government is responsible for, and the lack of jobs and the lack of quality services from public institutions. So at the end of the day, you just not bothered. You don't care. Like, you have enough to do. You just want to go and put food on the table for your family at the end of the day. So you don't care much. But I think that we need to change our attitudes, because it is our attitudes that are allowing things like this to thrive, not just in Nigeria, Nigeria, as I've said, but across Africa. And that is why we see the increase in these militant groups. We see now even countries you never would have thought are now having to experience this. And this is becoming a global challenge. And Africans, we must get involved to make sure that to help the government in realizing security for all of us. But Nigeria is a very interesting case. It's a very special case with insurgents of Boko Haram, and the laxity from the government in dealing with this group, I think, has made it, people just don't care. So that is that. And also we looked at Lyberia, and now for the first time in a long period of time, Air France will resume its flights there come January 2020. And also now, where was I putting this matter away? And anyway, we looked at Uganda and the fracas that happened there yesterday between the police and the official opposition leader, Mr. Kizza Besigye. He was arrested. He was sprayed with the water cannons there. But later on, he was released from police custody. And we looked at Mozambique and, of course, the growth of the insurgent groups there, the Islamic State. They are there, and it even was a security concern before the country went to its election last month. And we looked at Sudan and the leader now, the Prime Minister, Mr. Abdallah Hamdok, being the first high-figure person to visit Darfur since 2003. How many years is that? That President Omar al-Bashir or one of his ministers never bothered to go there and see what is really happening. And it's just saddened me this morning to learn that there still are 1.5 million people in refugee camps there in their own country. So my prayer and hopes is that the new Prime Minister, Mr. Abdallah Hamdok, and the rest of the authority there in Sudan will actually see ways in having these people go back to their homes, assuring them of their securities. And as we normally say here, I think there has to be some responsibility. Some people must take the responsibility of what led to this to have happened the way it is happening. I know, former president is in the court and is answering to, but the killings that happened in Darfur, that is not even part of the charge sheet. I think because the army officials who are still in the reins of Sudan there were also part of that, so they cannot bring this. So this is not part of the charge sheet of the what is being charged with there in Sudan is some economic crimes that he committed, money laundering and things like that, but not the deaths of the people in Darfur, which made ICC give a warrant of arrest for him. And I think that is why the US has come out, even after even SADC, I think, asked for it, and other African countries asked for it, that they should remove Sudan as a part of to the list of countries that are aiding and are supporting terrorism across the world from that list. And the US said no. I think because perhaps they're using this as the dangling carrot, and perhaps they're bailing for Omar al-Bashir's blood, and they want him to go to the ICC and be tried there, because they know Mr. Bashir will not be. It is not going to be a fair trial. Not on him, but there are things that will not be brought up. Like I said, of the charge sheet and what is being charged with, and the case that is still continuing there in Khartoum. I've not seen where they mentioned, and the killing that happened in Darfur. Of course, the other side also participated, because it was not just the government only that was killing people in Darfur, but there are other people there that also participated and brought Sudan to the place that it were during that time. But what really is worrying me, that 1.5 million victims are still languishing in refugee camps. Mr. Hamdok, please do right by your people. And by him going there, I think it was perhaps a new beginning and a new start of reaching out to the people who I'm sure have been feeling very marginalized there by their own government. And then, when a people feels like that, tell me how Boko Haram will not recruit them. Very much. Tell me how Al-Shabaab will not reach out to them and say, that is why you're fighting these people, because we also feel the same way. So it is a good thing there. So now, 7 days to go. We are on a countdown here, and 7 days to go before South Sudan's peace deal. We said we will talk about it until the 12th of November and past that. And now, War-torn South Sudan is barreling towards a crisis and could slide back into fighting. This was a warning by the International Crisis Group. Like, things like this just make my heart drop. Do you know how very hopeful I was over this matter of South Sudan? But now I feel like, okay, this is a report that was released yesterday by the International Crisis Group over the matters and the ongoings there in South Sudan. And they said, the new report said that the country's warring parties are not ready to form a coalition government on November 12th. And as much as looking at the matters at hand and the issues that were supposed to be ironed out that have not been ironed out so far, my problem here is, why is it that now at the last stretch, the government and the camp of Mr. Machar were very quiet all through this time? I was here, or we were here together, and the rest of everybody else out there, waiting to hear updates from what is happening, what are some of the things that have been done, what is the challenges, what is still remaining. We were hoping that the 6 months will be so busy with us being kept up to date with what is happening in terms of towards the gearing to the end and the deadline, which is on 12th November. So they were all interesting, very, very quiet. We did not hear much that was happening. Every now and then, you could hear something from President Kiir or Riek Machar, but not so much in terms of the peace deal. So until now, towards the last stretch, that is when you started hearing things like, oh no, we need more time. Oh no, we have not yet ironed out issues. Why were they quiet all this time? They were given from May. They were added 6 months. Why were they quiet in June? Why were they quiet in July? Why were they quiet in August? Why were they quiet in September? Why now are these people coming out? Mr. Machar, why now is you and your camp coming out and saying that you don't see a prospect of having this unity government formed on the 12th of November? These problems were there even after the extension of the 6 months that you given after you came back from Rome. Remember, the deadline was supposed to be in May, but you allowed an extension of 6 months. And these months have been passing by. And sometimes we were sitting and we're wondering, why is nobody talking? What is happening? Is the peace deal happening? What are some of the challenges? What have they talked about and how far? We needed to know about the development. Forget us. The people of South Sudan, I think you owe them, and you owe it to them, to tell them what is happening, and they were waiting. So you all chose to be very quiet, even knowing very well. But I remember 2 months into the 6 months after, they were given, I think Machar wrote to President Salva Kiir saying, he's worried that 2 months have passed. And I think we talked about this here. 2 months had passed and nothing substantial has been achieved. And so he was worried that they might run out of time before they were able to talk about or iron out the matters that they were supposed to have, before the deadline of the 12th of November. But I don't recall receiving a reply from the South Sudan's president. I don't remember reading anywhere the President Salva Kiir responded to the letter by Dr. Machar. If he did, perhaps I didn't get hold of it. If you know it, please write to me and let me know if President Salva Kiir responded to that letter by Dr. Riek Machar. Instead, what we had over and over again are very hard stands, both from the presidency of South Sudan and also his deputy, who is now in exile there in Khartoum. I remember they wanted to meet one time. I think Machar wanted to meet Kiir. Was it in Addis Ababa? Where was it? Some place outside of. Mr. Kiir was like, no, you have to come back to Juba. So I think they went over back and forth. I don't know if that meeting ever happened. So you can see the lack of will by the leaders there in South Sudan to make sure that peace returns in that country and that country stabilizes. And this really, really saddens me. All these months, since last year in September, the revitalized peace that happened last year, the agreement that happened last year in September, They were given time until May. Nothing happened. Nobody talked about nothing. No development, nothing. So you were added another 6 months. And you kept quiet throughout. You didn't come out strongly and speak about these matters that you're worried about and the need for their urgent attention and for them to be implemented. You were quiet. So now a few days too, because today we are counting 7 days to go to the 12th of November. And now we have to sit here and read a report that an international crisis group gave yesterday, saying that the country is not ready and the warring parties aren't ready to form a coalition government on the 12th of November. And of course, when opposition leader Riek Machar is planned to return and once again serve as President Salva Kiir's deputy, not forgetting the nearly 400,000 people who have since lost their lives in this war of egos, in this selfishness that South Sudan's leaders have exhibited so far. I'm disappointed by President Salva Kiir. I'm disappointed by Riek Machar. I'm disappointed by all the leadership there in South Sudan, who I've never heard them address the concern. They're sitting there saying they're not the warring parties. They're not prepared. They don't think they'll be ready to form this peace government. But do they care that the people of South Sudan are ready and are yearning? Because they have been held in a limbo for a very, very long time. And they feel, it's about time for us to take control of our country and for us to move forward as a country. They have been at a limbo for the longest time, since the war broke in 2013 there. The numbers of refugees, 2.4 million refugees from South Sudan are across the world. What a shame that the leadership of South Sudan cannot see this. And today we are sitting here and they're telling us, yesterday I was reading another news here, I didn't even want to get into it. Mr. Riek Machar and his camp are asking for an extra 100 days for what? You had 6 months. Which part? Okay, you can sit there and talk about President Salva Kiir fine did not, I don't know the reasons he did not give the money. He just gave part of the money that was supposed to be used to implement peace. And it's just yesterday here I was reading some soldiers are leaving their camps. The people are hungry. The soldiers are hungry there. They're tired of just sitting there because they were located very specific places and positions there, according to the agreement last time. So the soldiers are also tired. So they're leaving. So you think until when? Even the most loyal people in the world sometimes get tired. And maybe one day, especially the soldiers, perhaps their eyes will open and they realize, you know what? It is us. It is our people who are losing in this war. While our leaders are going like this at each other, it is us, the people of South Sudan. It is our country that is losing. And you never know. People who were very loyal to Omar al-Bashir turned against him. In fact, they are the ones who caught him early in the morning when he went to do his prayers. They let him do it. And the people that was trusted to look after him, and even Robert Mugabe. And that's why he died a very bitter man, because the people who he had trusted to look after his life, to offer him protections, at the end of the day are the ones who sided with the other side. So sometimes people in even the army, the most loyal people get to a point they say, you know what, enough is enough. What is best in this situation? So at this moment, according to this international crisis group, report that was released on Monday, they're saying, a unity government formed next week will be at immediate risk of a bloody collapse. Like reading such a thing with only 7 days to go to this peace deal, I can't even tell you how I'm feeling this afternoon. So I think this is... so they're saying that the diplomats should focus their pressure on resolving the remaining issues needed to create a viable government. These diplomats What have they been doing in the last 6 months? That is what they were supposed to be doing, focusing on resolving these matters, because I think these are some of the things that made the other deadline pass. So they already knew. It is not that they were coming in a new scenario where they did not understand, the currency there, what was holding water there. They knew very well. So where was their focus? Why were they not advancing this? Why were they not putting enough pressure on these matters that really matter to the people of South Sudan? So meanwhile, reports indicate that the latest round of face-to-face talks between two rivals is set for the Ugandan capital, Kampala. The request of President Yoweri Museveni. So President Yoweri Museveni will be trying to mediate there between these two warring, rivals there in Uganda. I don't know when he plans to do that because the deadline is next week. As I said, there are 7 days to go before the 12th of November, where a coalition government is meant to be formed in South Sudan. President Salva Kiir has threatened before that in case Machar does not want to come back, he'll go on and form this unity government. I don't know with whom. But of course, he's been told, you can't do that. I think that will not be the best situation for South Sudan, with putting just all things aside. So it's exhausting. It's very exhausting. So I'm just here, and we're praying for South Sudan, and we're just waiting to see on 12th of November and after 12th of November what really will be the way forward for South Sudan. So thank you so much for joining us. This has been Good Morning Africa, where we've been looking at news making headlines across Africa. We looked at Uganda, Togo, Mozambique, Sudan, and the controversial Nile Dam, their controversy, and Mr. Al-Fatah El-Sisi there, the chairperson of AU, is now seeking a mediation from the United States between the matter that involves him and Ethiopia and Sudan. So I don't understand why the AU chairperson goes outside of Africa to look for mediation. I think that is also something I had a problem with this. Today I've been having a problem with so many things here. And of course, Guinea-Bissau, United Nations Security Council on Monday joined regional voices calling for restraint and dialogue to end the latest political crisis in the West African nation of Guinea-Bissau. Remember, President Vaz, official time out of office was supposed to end. His term was supposed to end on June 20th. But because of the emerging issues there in Guinea-Bissau, I think through ECOWAS that mediated that process, allowed him to stay in office. And the elections are supposed to be happening on 24th of November. But what Mr. Vaz did, the Guinea-Bissau acting president now, is he fired a whole prime minister, and he fired all the ministers, which if you are in an acting position, you don't have the powers to do that. So I think after he did that, attracted a lot of protest there, and now Guinea-Bissau is in a crisis, as well as I think Guinea. So interesting times here in Africa. So thank you. And we also looked at Guinea itself, and South Sudan, and Rwanda, and Lyberia, Cameroon, Zimbabwe. We looked at Zimbabwe, but we didn't talk much about it. Togo, Mozambique, Sudan. We looked at a host of African countries. So thank you so much for joining us. Of course, tonight we will be having the diplomatic leaks at 8 p.m. East African time, so hopefully you can join us then. But for now, thank you so much for engaging with me and for your company. My name is Miriam Mugutu, and from the whole of Punchline Africa crew, we thank you so much, and we love you for watching.